Hey guys, Pulse here, and welcome to the next installment of Delving Deep ESO. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Holy Trinity and how it will function in PvE circumstances, as well as my thoughts and concerns on the system as a whole, and how it could potentially turn out by the time ESO is actually released. Now, before I get started with really the meat of the video, I do want to mention a small mistake I had in my previous video, where I said something along the lines of cloth armor could potentially provide cooldown reduction. Now, after listening to the video again, I realized I didn't quite make it clear. I do realize Elder Scrolls does not have a cooldown system in place, but my thought process was something along the lines of this, that they will give you a bonus to lowered mana cost plus a higher mana regen, kind of in the same bundle on one bonus, and it will kind of yield the same results. And I didn't quite correlate that and say that properly in the previous video. So I do want to make it clear, I do realize there's no cooldown system in Elder Scrolls Online. Now, on to really the point of the video. What is the Trinity? The Trinity is the combination of these three roles: the tanks, the damage dealers, and the healers. These are kind of, like I said, the pillars of MMO design, especially in PvE content, really since the genre's inception. Now, the idea of the Trinity is, even in games that don't really have one, just Guild Wars 2 is an example, you balance these roles in such a fashion that it will always yield the best results. And it's always been this tank, damage dealer, healer sort of triangle setup here, which is why it's called the Trinity. Now, Guild Wars 2 is a good example of where the Trinity wasn't utilized quite right and wasn't done purposely. They did it this way. And yet it still became part of the gameplay in a kind of different manner. I'll really go into depth what I mean by that a little bit later and put it in some context. Now, I'll really kind of speak on the Trinity as a whole and a little bit more after I kind of delve into these separate roles. So let me just jump in at the tanks. They're the man on the front line, the damage soakers, the attention grabbers, the initiators as well. They're almost always the initiators, especially again in PvE content. Now, of all the things that are these are common ways to describe the tank in MMO space, and their job is a vital one, where they really, their job is to protect their allies from taking damage by taking it to their own face and taking the brunt of the damage. They're known to be damage sponges in this case. Now onto the healers, the role which it really allows the non-aggressive types to aid allies without even lifting a blade. And healing in an MMO space can be quite stressful, and in my experience is more so than the other two roles, especially within a PvE environment compared to tanks. Now, healers have the important duty of making the call on who lives and who dies, so their role is quite important. Now, onto DPS, or damage dealers, is perhaps it's the simplest to describe, but from my experience is not the simplest to do a lot of times. Now, it's easier to pick up without prior experience, and it's the most popular for sure. But don't take the job lightly, because as I said, you would expect the main job for the DPS to be dealing as much damage as possible, but there's still so much more you can do, and you have to be on your toes, and good DPS will always separate themselves from the bad DPS, and not just in terms of damage numbers, but how they can react to the change within a certain encounter or certain circumstances, such as changing mob types, switching targets. Just, you have to be on your toes if you're going to be a great DPS. Now, let me kind of double back and really go into what each role can do and what I meant by some things. Now, the tanks, like I said, are going to be the damage sponges. They're going to go in, they're going to grab the aggro. A lot of times the tank is often the kind of raid leader or group leader in a lot of, especially high-end PvE guilds and that sort of thing. The tank is usually the one who coordinates the encounter prior. In previous games, just for a while as an example, we'll use markers and that sort of thing to divvy up priority and that kind of thing. And they also are the ones, like I said, they initiate. They go in and they have to grab all of the aggro or the attention of all the mobs in the area, and then they have to hold it, and they, a lot of times even, especially, again, going back to WoW is a good reference for tanks, is that a lot of times you have to move the boss. It's a very active role, and one of the things a lot of people don't realize that differentiates a good tank from a bad tank is, if you're a good tank, you will be on the move, you will be talking and coordinating properly, but you will also have eyes on the back of your head watching all of your allies, because if suddenly something goes wrong and you have to intervene, you have to be prepared and able to jump to their aid, because you're the damage sponge. If there's a damage dealer or a healer under attack, it's your job to save them. Now onto the healers, really what they can do. In Elder Scrolls, I just want to say first off that healers are not going to be quite the same as in previous games, because there's no single target healing, at least not nearly as many sort of single target capabilities in terms of healing, and more so of splash AoE and splash healing and AoE healing, where you'll either leave marks upon the ground, which symbols or water or what have you, where allies can stand and be healed, that sort of thing. But from what I can tell, as I mentioned kind of with the weapons video, the healing staff is kind of going to be the kind of go-to healing weapon for classes and players that want to use healing. Now I foresee as I mentioned back with the class as well, the Templar is going to be kind of the go-to healer in this respect. They're going to probably grab a healing staff and then spec all the way into the healing, and I kind of am worried that we'll see tons of Templar healers and that's all we'll see, but hopefully they do well to kind of spread it out. I kind of hope the Nightblade has some healing stuff to give some variety there. Now, as I mentioned with the healers, there's not going to be single target healing, but I imagine the staff is going to have a single target sort of channeled beam or kind of cast filler, as it would be known in MMO terms. And there's really not much to say about the healer. We'll have to wait and see how well they can balance the AoE healing kind of aspect of the game. It kind of gives me a vibe like they don't know if they want to go the Guild Wars 2 route and provide everyone healing if they care to take it, or if they want to go the dedicated healer route like previous MMOs. So we'll see how that turns out. And then onto the DPS role. As I mentioned, it's not a role which should be taken lightly. I realize it's the one that a lot of people sort of take for granted, but as someone that has rated high end, it's often the one that can make the fight go the way you want it. If you have good DPS, for example, just think of a fight where you're fighting a boss and the tank is doing well to hold the boss, and then suddenly there's adds or a new target that you have to burn down extremely quickly. If your DPS are not paying attention and they don't burn it quite quickly, it can really set a timer off where it doesn't quite match up, and then it just slowly degrades into an unrepairable circumstance. This is just one example, and I want people to realize that DPS, even though it's the one that gets the most sort of flack from everyone because it's the easiest to pick up, I would not say it's the easiest to master. Honestly, I would say that's healer, but that's just my point of view. Now, really, that's the roles as they are. Now, let me kind of go back, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Guild Wars 2 example, and kind of build off of there and explain some things about my thoughts and concerns about the Trinity in Elder Scrolls Online. Now, in Guild Wars 2, there's really three classes that, for the longest time, I haven't played in a little bit, and I don't really know if this has changed much, but the idea will still stand. There's the class the Guardian. It played a role known as the Anchor, but essentially it was the role of the tank. There was the DPS, which was filled by the quote-unquote best class, which was, in the case of this example, 3 warriors. So you had a Guardian, 3 warriors, and they were incredibly popular for a long time for their burst DPS, that sort of thing. And then you had a Mesmer support / DPS hybrid. Now, the Mesmer really kind of filled the slot of what you would normally consider a healer, because it was no dedicated healer. But essentially the same thing is true, that it has the 3 pillars, and for the longest time, anyone that did kind of quote-unquote hardcore PvE in Guild Wars 2, if you can call it that, it used this 3-pillar system for speed runs and that sort of thing. You had your tank, your DPS, and then your support character, and that almost always yielded the best results. And anyone that's played Guild Wars 2 for a moderate amount of time can tell you that even though the lack of defined roles was really a sort of selling point for a lot of people, me included, it didn't actually turn out the way a lot of people wanted it, and it didn't really benefit the experience at all, and in fact caused quite a bit of segregation throughout the dungeoning community, because testing and theory crafting really placed, in the example mentioned earlier, these 3 classes in a much higher tier than others. So it made it so if you wanted to do anything even remotely considered hardcore in Guild Wars 2, you had to play these classes, which is even worse than it was in, say, like WoW, where there was at least there was multiple choice here. You could have the 3 pillars, but you had to, I mean, obviously there was tiered which ones were better, but at least with the group size in WoW, you could pick and choose and kind of deviate a little bit if you had to. Now, that's really kind of, you're probably wondering, why does this even matter, and how does it correlate to Elder Scrolls Online? And this is really how. I have 2 things listed here. ESO would be bringing back the concrete roles. At least it really looks that way, which is actually a boon, considering how it really didn't turn out the way we expected in Guild Wars 2. And it actually turned out to be quite the negative feature, more so than a positive one. So it's kind of a relief, at least for me, that it's kind of making a return here. Now, more importantly, and the one I will really dive into, is, in my opinion, the Holy Trinity could potentially trounce all over the hybridization some players may favor when playing Elder Scrolls Online. And it's actually one of the things that they've been pushing hard, is that you can build your character however you want. Now, let me just explain this a little bit more in depth. Now, as I mentioned with Guild Wars 2, even though there was no defined roles created by the developers, sorry about that, the player base found the best 3 kind of fill-ins, and the rest is really history. Those were the 3 to go. As they balance, they switch those 3 out, and you still have your 3 pillars of PvE content, and that's how you did your Trinity kind of thing. Now, ESO will have the defined roles back, as I mentioned earlier. However, history has shown that dedication and someone taking a role to the max instead of deviating even the littlest will always provide better results in coordinated content. Now, just to make it clear, what I'm trying to say here is that if you take 1 dedicated DPS and 1 dedicated healer, it is not the same as if you had 2 hybrid DPS / healers. Now, there's 2 reasons for this, really. One is that if you min-max all the way in one direction for one form of output, in this case, I'll just say DPS. If you min-max for all DPS, it is simply going to be more efficient than splitting stats. It will always work that way. It's just how the math and the numbers work in the background. Now, secondly, a hybrid player is splitting their job into 2 parts. So they're not only limiting their stats, but they're also limiting their output on both sides, because if you think of it this way, it's kind of the same as driving while talking on the cell phone. You neither drive as well as you could, and you can't articulate your thought over the cell phone as you would as if you were sitting still talking on the phone. And even a kind of a more irrelevant one would be just an example from me commentating while playing a fast-paced game. I do neither one of those at my best while doing them together. It's just how the human brain works. It splits the tasks apart as you're doing them. And there are a couple ways. I just want to kind of delve into this a little bit. There are a couple ways they could balance this out, and I really hope they do, because I'm actually a fan of the ability to hybridize, and I hope they do well to kind of balance the spectrum here, so we don't have it. The hybrids are the quote-unquote newbies, and then the hardcore people are all in their sort of defined roles. I hope that doesn't happen, but we will see, because like I said, there's a couple reasons. I'll just get into it. One being that if they provide substantial reason to either form of itemization. Now, I mean, provide worthwhile incentive to take either a full set of heavy armor and an equally enticing reward for mixing and matching your armor of choice. Now, theory crafters are going to find the best no matter what, as I kind of mentioned earlier. It's in the devs' hands, though, to keep the numbers game right in the middle, if they can. Now, it's a hard job, and I have to say good luck, Zenimax, because you've got quite the challenge ahead of you. It's easy for me to say, without any doubt at all, that the communities behind MMOs will always find the best within a couple days max. They will always finish all of the content in a couple days max. They will always find the best builds in a couple days max. So, Zenimax, you have a good challenge ahead of you in trying to balance the hybrids versus defined roles system going on. Now, another potentially good idea and a way that they could deal with this issue is to create content which pushes the boundary between the defined roles a little bit more. Now, most MMOs have kind of been doing this for a while and slowly pushing it so that each role doesn't kind of sit concretely in their one thing. That's really their go-to. That's what they do. But certain circumstances will sway them towards doing something else for at least periods of time. Now, just an example that comes to my head right away is WoW. This has been done in WoW quite recently, especially in their newer content. But they're doing it where just if you have a healer, for example, and you're fighting a boss and you're going through the encounter and you're at a stage where you've done your job and gotten everyone healed up, and there's suddenly a lull in damage output from the boss, from their minions, what have you, and it's a low damage sort of time going on, the healers should be contributing to the damage on the boss, thus speeding up the encounter and providing leeway down the line, that kind of thing. Now, hopefully they really provide encounters, especially in, I'm thinking like hardcore PvE content here, where they can really sort of fight by fight basis, a guild or a raid group will have to kind of realistically ponder about how they could tweak their roles in between each fight. Potentially the first fight in, I'll just call them adventure zones, because they've said this is really where the kind of big group PvE is going to happen. If they go into an adventure zone and the first boss or the first encounter really sort of suits itself towards defined roles, everyone will go defined roles. But maybe there's encounters down the line that make you think, well, maybe if we had a couple hybrids in here, it could make such and such part of the encounter a little bit easier. If they do that, I think that would be kind of a nice balance between what you could and couldn't do in terms of hybrid and defined roles. That way there's a good mix, and people will be willing to sort of try new things and hybridize as they can. And really, if they allow people to tweak the roles as they say they will in between fights, sort of as long as you're out of combat, and if you bring maybe backup armor and you've played enough and gotten enough skills, you can really sort of tweak back and forth how you want to play and really suit yourself to defined role in this fight, hybrid on this fight, that kind of thing. Now, really, guys, that's all there is for me today. I just like to say, please like, subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Comment down below. I'd love some damn feedback. I'm getting it on other forums, but I'd like it on the actual YouTube videos if I could. And I'd really like it if you guys followed on the Nova Pulse Gaming Facebook page for updates, and just really stick to the channel for everything Elder Scrolls Online and gaming as a whole. And this has been Pulse. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.